tiers of armor. And this time around, when a player sees NPCs in that faction walking around with these armors, go, man, cool, I'd like to get that for myself. They actually will be able to. Through joining the factions and gaining loyalty, the player will be able to acquire armor sets. So when they start, it might be something like this. It's quite plain and unadorned. This is kind of the recruit level armor, the first tier of armor that's available to players. And then as they move up through the different ranks of that faction, they'll have access to purchase even more powerful and more elaborate armors until they move all the way up to the 4th tier. Each of the 10 major factions in the games have armor sets, and they all have 4 tiers available to the player. And it's not just kind of buy a helmet at tier 1 and buy a breastplate at tier 2. It's actually full suits of armor for every tier faction rank that they move up through. And here you can see, this is the scholars in Cheyenne. You actually saw their soldiers in the blue uniforms fighting on the playfield earlier. And you can see here that the iconography and colours on the banners actually reflect into the colours of the uniform, so that the player gets visual cues as to who is in control of a given town. So when they approach it, if you've been gaily beheading people in the red uniform, you might want to think twice about wandering into a town protected by guards in the red uniform. So the players will have these choices to make. This is the Hyrcanians. They're one of the more barbaric tribes that are threatening Kitai from outside. You can see the Great Wall off there in the distance. And you can see the great level of detail that the artists are able to put into these armours and really bring them to life and kind of fuse the Eastern setting into the medieval fantasy setting that we have for the game, and bring to life these great armour sets that the players will be able to acquire through their faction gameplay. So here you see we're back in one of the faction cities walking around, and we made a very conscious choice early on with the art and design for the expansion, is that we didn't want to look towards the Japanese influence of the Orient, because that's used a lot in games, and we wanted to do something different. So our artists were asked to look for inspiration in the ancient Chinese and ancient Korean cultures. And we're actually quite lucky because we have production offices in Beijing, and we work with our Korean partners at NeoVis to launch the game in that territory. So we've actually been lucky enough to be able to send some of our artists to China and to Korea to get to visit some of the ancient sites that still exist to this day. And that's allowed them to have this inspiration for these wonderful environments that are very in keeping with the setting and give players a really good sense of place. I think as players are playing through this, they're not going to suddenly mistake this for Northern Europe somewhere or Egypt. They know exactly where they are. And we've done it in subtle ways as well. You notice that as the players walking through these buildings, all the buildings are open plan and you can walk through them. There's no billboard buildings with closed doors in the expansion. It's all part, if you've ever visited that part of the world and been lucky enough to see some of these ancient sites, you see that this is how they built their cities, how they built their palaces and temples. And we've really tried to stay true to that to help make the experience more authentic, that the player really feels that they're somewhere new and exciting for them. So, on the subject of new and exciting things, we're also adding new mounts to the game, and Joel's going to tell you a little bit more about these lovely creatures.
Yes, so we're adding 2 mounts to the game, a wolf mount and a tiger mount. And today I'll talk mostly about the tiger mount. I'll give you a little bit of history on the philosophy of our MMO design, first of all. When we thought about making mounts in the expansion, we thought about how other games do it. And what other games do when they give you a mount, it's generally a speed increase. And we wanted to make mounts something more useful than that. So instead of making your fast horse useless by giving you a new mount that's faster, we're instead making these mounts, giving them the ability to stealth. So while you ride your tiger, you'll be able to sneak around in the playfield. PvP, PvE, you'll be able to use it to get around unseen. Of course, it still depends on your skill at hiding, but it's a mount that you can use for another purpose than just running faster. On top of that, we've also taken a very barbaric approach to the way that you earn the mounts, because you're not going to find a vendor in Conan's world that sells you a tiger for 5 gold on a street corner. That's not how it works. So in order to get the tiger mount, you'll first have to join the cult that worships the tiger. You'll have to climb your way up through the ranks of that cult. And once you've done that, you'll have to undergo a ritual to earn your tiger, which involves taking off your armour, putting away your weapons, going out into the woods and beating the crap out of the mother tiger with your bare hands. That's the barbarian way. And then you take a cub from the den and you have to train it as your own. Okay. And it's a quest line. You'll basically have to teach it to stalk, to hunt, and to kill men. Once you've done that, you can craft a saddle and turn it into a mount, or you can keep it as a combat pet. But once you've made that choice, you'll never be able to change it. So it's important that players recognise the choices that they make in the expansion will affect their future. Back to Craig.
Okay, and in this last section of the presentation, I want to talk a bit about character development options that we're adding in Rise of the Godslayer. What we wanted to do was make sure that when we took the Easter theme, we were able to add it as broadly as possible across all the different classes that already exist, rather than focusing it on one new cool class who got everything. So there isn't any new specific classes in the expansion, but every class will have access to a new system called the Alternate Advancement System. And what that system means is that while the players are going through their ordinary gameplay, when they're completing quests, raiding, killing monsters in the wild, they'll be earning alternate advancement points. And they'll be able to spend those points on brand new feat trees that exist in addition to their existing ones, where they'll have whole new abilities, some for PvE, some for PvE, for their class or their archetype. And it's really, the way to think about it is think of it as a lateral progression rather than a vertical one. So rather than just adding levels and adding more numbers to the damage, we're actually diversifying the abilities and the attacks available to the player. Because the content through the expansion will get progressively harder, and the player will have had to master some of these alternate advancement abilities to be able to succeed in the encounters in the later playfield regions. And we then decided that we'd take a new concept and add it into the alternate advancement system, which is the concept of training. And what training means is that once they've earned a new ability from the alternate advancement system, the player will be able to focus their training on it. And training works as an overtime mechanic, much like you see in a game like EVE Online, for example. So when they've got the new combo or spell that they want to focus their training on, they focus on it, and over time that spell levels up and becomes a more powerful version of that ability. And that means that the player really has two levels of depth of choice. Not only are they choosing which way they go down the feat trees and which abilities they take, they also have to choose where to focus their training and which of those abilities they want to make more powerful through the training system. And that's it's on or offline progression, so it's real time. So the player will be able to progress in the power even offline. Okay, so that about wraps it up for the presentation itself. And now we'll organise some Q&As, so some interviews, so that we can sit down and answer any questions that you guys have. And Arnie's over here.
I always jump on.
That's his cue. Questions?
I think the best thing is if you sit down with you online.
Yeah, sure.
And